That said, wouldn't it be great if we could talk a little bit about sharing and publishing now that we've got sort of the basics down? We could have a more advanced workshop. One of the things that I wanted to do, and I just don't know if we're going to have time for it, but right at the end of this tutorial, and of course you can go through on your own, but there is an add a map. So let's do just about a minute of that. Add a map, create an express map. So back on our bare bones story map, we're getting there, but in the plus sign, there is an add map, okay? Add map. And you've got, as you know, you did this earlier, you can add existing add existing maps inside ArcGIS Online that you or others have created. If others have created them, they have to have shared them, right? You can't add something that's not shared. Okay, just wanted to make sure you knew that. But up in the upper right, add sign, plus sign, add map, and then we're in this screen here, and we're going to add a new express map. Add a new express map. Express maps, again, this is why we really love working, one of the reasons why we love working with the education community, such as yourselves and many others. But you give us this feedback of, hey, we need a way, this came in from suggestions, we need a way of creating really simple maps. I don't want to have to go out to Pro or online and create, add features and so on and so forth and do digitizing and stuff like that. I just want to be able to simply add what we then termed an express map. So let's go ahead and add an express map. This is the kind of thing that you're going to be able to do. And let me show you, there's a little tutorial here. I'm going to skip that though. And I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to add an express map and I'm going to go to Valparaiso. And it looks like the second one there. Valparaiso with an I in it. Might be a little tricky to spell, but it's in Valparaiso, Indiana. Okay, I want to be able to add that. Okay, add to map. Great. Super. So far, so good. I've got my campus there. This is where we started on our field trip. And if I wanted to, I could even say, well, okay, this is great. I want to be able to maybe add the campus boundary, something like this, with the tools that are in the upper right. Okay, so I've got a point, a place marker, and a little outline of the campus with the tools that are in the upper right of that. So this is a express map. It took me about 30 seconds to create. There are more powerful things you can do with this. And while you're finishing that express map, I'm going to pull one of these up in the actual resource that we've been using. This story map here, which is all about Dolores Huerta, came out last summer. I think it's a very powerful story map. But one of the things I wanted to highlight here is, notice if you scroll about 10% of the way down, or you can just look at this screen, it's an effective use of the express map that you just created for Valparaiso campus. So it's got about, where she was born, where she grew up, what were the roots of her activism, why she cared about all of this. And so, it's a simple idea, but I think it's really powerful here. And you can, of course, as you would expect, customize the base map, the scale, what you want in the left side. You can float these in different places, but it's an express map, basically. Okay, and other people have done this for whale migrations and other things. Don't overthink these. You can't, these are kind of like map notes, okay? They're not all that powerful, but I think they have their place, and this is a great example of it, okay? So that example is actually inside the main story map that we've been using. So this is what we just did, and this is the example of the use of the express map, okay? All right. Now we've got just a little bit of time left, so I'd just like to talk about some other things that are really pertinent as you move forward in your use of story maps that I think are real. Well, not just me, but the people that I've been working with over the last, well, it's 11 years now in story mapping. One of the things in here is, okay, I've got this thing that I've been constructing right here. It's draft right now. Nobody can see it, and I haven't shared it. So I could preview it, see what it's going to look like on different devices. We've already reviewed that briefly. But I'm going to go ahead and hit this publish button. Here's how, just like in ArcGIS Online, for those of you that use that, you've got these different levels of sharing. And you got to be sensitive of the content that you've got, obviously. I mean, I'm working with tribal governments, with tribal sacred sites. They're not going to share with the world, okay? They've got maybe a group inside their organization. So it's a mid-level kind of a sharing. I'm also a member of the caving community. There's a National Cave Protection Act. I'm working with people in, and probably you are too, in health or in, got HRB considerations for their research. This isn't going to be public. And then we can get into a deeper discussion, but obviously be sensitive to that when you're now going to this zone here. Your organization, that's, for many of you, it's the UMass organization, right? For me, it's, you can see, you saw earlier, it's my Denver Regional Office ESRI organization. You may be members of several organizations, and that's fine. If you go out to developers.arcgis.com and get yourself a free developer account, it's basically a one-person organization. It's kind of a nice sandbox. You're the only person in that organization, but you can do the things that we've been doing here. So anyway, I just wanted to get into that just a little bit, because inside, ArcGIS Online, when you've got your content, you also have the sharing indication right there of who can share, or which groups can see your map. Now, inside your story map, you might have, as we do, other maps inside of it, right? So if you make this, for example, available to your organization, did you share the layers and the maps inside your story map with the organization? If not, it should give you a box when you share it saying, hey, some of the layers inside here are actually not shared. So if you don't share those, they're going to get a broken symbol, or something's not going to work inside your story map because it's referring to things that are actually not shared. So that is something to think about. The other thing that I want to share with you all is I have, I'm like many of you, I'm in education. So I'm always thinking about student learning and, engagement with the content and so on and so forth. And in this case, I've got a quiz that's actually inside there in that story map, that if we had gone through the whole lesson, which we didn't, I understand there's always a little bit of angst. We didn't go through the whole lesson. No worries, mate. But inside here, I've got a survey 1, 2, 3, and then I've got, what is a kettle lake? What have you just learned about? What's a watershed boundary? What's a DEM? So I've got some questions that they should know after they've gone through this field activity. Now, notice in this case, this is kind of an important note about the sharing. In this case, I would never share this with the whole public if I'm asking for their actual name and not a made-up name or a team name or something, or their initials or something. I would only share that with the organization, or maybe with a group inside that organization, like their geomorph class. So again, things to keep in mind when you're going through these. We touched on managing this a little bit, but what happens when the students graduate? This is an ongoing discussion with various lists and so on, and with geospatial librarians such as Becky and her colleagues. A lot of this stuff is pretty ephemeral, right? So how do you make sure that some of this amazing content lives on? There are various ways to transfer content from one organization to another. Some universities, for example, purge student content. So you students out there, you might want to have a developer.arcgis online organizational account so you can actually transfer some of this. And then again, so it's a bigger discussion than we have time for, but there are even ways. For example, one of our colleagues at the University of Michigan created a Jupyter notebook with a script in it that actually allows you to transfer ownership. And then we also work with GeoJobe, J-O-B-E. They've got some tools, some free, some you pay for, but they're well worth the fee to manage some of this content more effectively. Again, it's a bigger discussion than we have time for, but it's a worthy one to think about. Like, okay, I created this and it took me a month. Who's going to archive that? and it's maybe a really good content. I want to be able to get to the Dolores Huerta map. I don't know who created it at the moment. I didn't check, but I should check. And what if we want to look at that in 5 years? Is someone going to maintain it? So a couple of workflows we talked about. We actually created a story map from the builder site. That's what we mostly spent time on. We also mentioned, though, I mentioned going to ArcGIS Online. Remember with my campus infrastructure, the thing that I created with the light poles and benches, trash cans, tree species, shrubs, etc. How do I create a story map from that? Remember, it was under Share, and then it was create a web app. We talked briefly about Business Analyst Web, where you have a capability of sharing results, and you can make a story map right from there. You can also make a PDF. Some people still are interested in making, okay, I know it's going to be static. It's going to be, I can't interact with it, but creating a web map from that as well in ArcGIS Online. So there's a couple of other workflows, and I mentioned this, but I didn't actually demo it, but ArcGIS Pro to ArcGIS Online to Story Map from there. There's also some really compelling, okay, I've got a big story to tell. Remember we talked about at the beginning, maybe you don't put all that in one story map. Maybe you make a collection. And one of the collections is one on racial equity, which I am very much a fond of. This is a nice way of creating a whole body of content all on a certain theme. So that's a capability that you have at your fingertips as well, creating one of these collections. Okay. And there's another one that Alan Carroll, our Story Maps lead, as many of you know Alan, he's a wonderful man, and Story Maps in the Digital Humanities. So this is a collection, once again, all focused on digital humanities. I know it's a pretty broad term, and different people have different interpretations of what that means, but a nice collection in there. Okay, so that's another capability. A couple of resources that I have found to be very useful in this. One's called Visual Storytelling with Maps. And as you would expect, oftentimes the stories are told with story maps. So our nonprofits team, which is just as old as our education team, so it goes way back to 1992. Some tips I shared earlier about, remember the clues, acronym, keep it simple, don't have to put more is not always better, think about your audience. This goes into that in more depth, okay? So that is this visual storytelling with maps. Some of you know our associated colleagues on the Story Maps team. And so Alan Carroll and his team actually created, again, thinking about your audience, 9 steps to great storytelling, a great story map talking about this particular topic. It's easy to get together a map, but you need to think about it carefully as you're going through. It's not like you can't go and edit it later on, but that's a good resource. And then this is probably my favorite of the bunch in that small collection there, and that is my colleague Bernd Sokalski, who some of you have probably seen over the years on the plenary stage at the ESRI user conference. He's one of my favorite people, one of the smartest people in all of GIS, I think. And anyway, but Bernd's got this nice blog essay on things you could do with story maps that maybe you didn't think about. So examples of people creating annual reports and student portfolios. And we talked about the resumes, their CVs, tutorials in story maps and web mapping applications. So 2D and 3D, but very compelling, just to kind of get you thinking about what other things can I do with this. And okay, quiz time. Because story maps are static web mapping applications, they cannot display live data feeds. True or false? Let me pull up the chat here. Make sure people are still engaged. And oh, you folks are so good. You're good. Exactly. That's false on many levels. They're not static at all, and they can take live web feeds. Traffic cams, real-time stream flow, wildfire perimeters, etc. Yep. How about number 2? Once you share a story map with the public, you cannot unshare it. True or false? Becky, these folks, they're top notch. Yeah, exactly. Good point, Kai. But yeah, you can unshare it. And so if someone had saved that link, it won't work anymore. One of the things that I'm really passionate about is sharing sound. I think it's kind of an underused. So permit me for about 30 seconds here to, I'm not sharing system sound at the moment, so you probably won't be able to hear this, but a colleague and I created this Lakota language story map where we want the students going through this to understand the Lakota word for certain landforms like boundary, oihago, and hill, paha. And the point is several. A, we wanted the students to learn the Lakota word and the English word for landforms. But B, remember that I was talking about at the beginning, the bigger goal is oftentimes out there when you're creating this. Our bigger goal in this case was to draw attention to endangered indigenous languages and kind of plant some seeds so that people would say, hey, we can have tribal elders with whole blocks of narrative in here. Yeah, exactly. So we wanted to start small, but then encourage people to dig deeper with this whole idea of sound. And point C, on a technical note, because story maps are based on, HTML5 and the maps are with the fairly new edition, in this case, of the JavaScript API and so on. The idea here is that, on a technical note, is that I didn't have to go into any sort of coding except for a little bit of HTML. And all I had to do was point to where my sound files were kept, where I parked them. And the story maps tools are smart enough where they could say, oh, okay, there's Joseph's sound file. I'm going to configure a play button. I didn't have to program that, is the point. Nice. So several different levels that I want to introduce there. This is probably my favorite story map because I love music just as much as geography and GIS. And so this Alan Lomax's story map on his interviews in the late 70s in the South. And so you've got bluegrass, you've got blues, you've got, the sound. I mean, it's just awesome. Just awesome. So a very nice use of sound here, videos, but also just straight sound files, audio files. The sound of Planet Earth story map, again, this is my own creation, where I want the students and people going through this to actually take a short quiz. So I've got 100 sounds in here. And again, thinking about copyright and so on, these are all my own sounds that I record, so I didn't have to worry about that. They were all taken from videos. Actually, I just stripped out the sound from the videos. But for example, I've got, if I go to sound number 1, okay, I've got the market in Tunis. So they play that sound, and then when they're done, what is this sound? Okay, so I've got a link to, it's just a Google form in this case. It's not even a survey 1, 2, 3. It's the market in Tunis. So, okay. It's the Medina. Yeah, it's the market, it's the old walled city. Nice. So the point is, again, sound, in this case, with you can see the little sound files in there. And then I also have the Google Forms for the instant feedback. Last couple of things. I'm going to show just one of my 2 favorites. I've got so many favorites. You probably do too. You're map geeks. Okay. But this one was picked up by the Smithsonian. It won an award. And it's what I was talking about at the beginning about, using these tools to teach certain core content. So you've got a way of teaching about history, culture, etc., with these particular interactive stories of people doing their thing, making eggs, quilting, playing instruments, etc., etc. Okay, so it's just absolutely wonderful. Highly recommend you take a spin of that. Okay, My two recommendations here. First of all, I consider story maps to be an excellent method of teaching and learning about GIS, but even bigger than that, about core content that we talked about in lots of different disciplines for fostering media fluency, problem solving, good communication skills. But also, as I hinted at earlier, I believe there's a lot of value in connecting these pieces of the platform. So for example, I've got this that I really wanted to share with you in the closing moments here. Here's a story map on walkability. It's something I'm really passionate about. So in the not too distant days of, work travel, I really do think about, is this community, is this campus that I'm in right now walkable or not? So I've got a story map where I've got a photograph. Do you think that's walkable or not? I was there for the South Dakota GIS conference about 1.5 years ago, and it's the Mitchell, South Dakota. The Corn Palace is in the background there. Some of you know about the Corn Palace. And inside the story map, I have a link to my survey. In this case, is this place that you're in right now walkable or not? So my survey has about 5 questions: friendly or unfriendly for pedestrians, rate the walkability, so I have a little Likert scale in there, tick all the choices that describe the site: branches, snow, nice wide path, where is it, and then do you have a photograph of it? So kind of a simple survey, but then in my story map, I've got, like you did, you placed map, I've got my points that I and others have submitted points to. Now, in this case, here's my own point that I submitted to my own survey. It was very friendly to me and the kangaroos that I saw on that morning walk. Pretty cool. Good on you, mate. She'll be right. But the point is, it's all inside my story map. And then below there, I have another piece of this ArcGIS platform called the dashboard, which, as you know, have become incredibly used and popular over the last year with COVID and so on, people creating these dashboards about many health issues. So right now I've got 460 points that have been submitted to my survey. Roughly 3/4 of them are pedestrian friendly right now. One quarter are unfriendly. And one of the pie charts from one of the questions that I asked, I have a little legend on here, a photograph, and another live interactive web map. There's a couple points that I wanted to make here. A, this whole thing, the story map with the survey and the map and the dashboard, took me about 1 afternoon to create. Okay, so we're not talking days, weeks, months. These tools are very accessible and it's still a system. I'm not going to, say it's all bite-sized, gluten-free GIS, right? It's still a system. There's still some complexity, some slight clunkiness here and there and so on, but very doable and approachable. But I think the second thing that I really wanted to highlight here in showing you this was that I'm connecting different pieces of this GIS platform. Again, don't do them just because they're there. Don't connect these things just because they exist. But in my case, my story map has a survey in it, and it has a live interactive web map, and it has a dashboard. And so there's 4 things, including the story map, that kind of stitches them all together. Along those lines, there are other ways you can stitch things together. So for example, here, you may have seen my post on the higher education listserv from my team recently, but here's an example of how you could teach with modern web-based GIS in a intro to geovisualization GIS course. So in this case, I've got these story maps in here. So each one of these little tiles is an actual story map. So here is week 1, the second part of week 1, which is the hands-on component. So I've got all of these things that you'll recognize this, right? This is a story map. And I've got these interactive maps. I've got questions and things that the students will do inside the hands-on component. The whole thing, here's week 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is a 7-week course. Each one of these little tiles is a story map. So there's 32 story maps. And the way I stitched this one together is with the experience builder. That's why you see experience.arcgis.com. Remember I mentioned earlier, web app builder, next generation is experience builder. That's another way to stitch these together. Could I have done it with a collection of story maps? Yes. In part, I wanted to test how conducive the experience builder would be to building a course. one of the things I wanted to do with this is to take it out of an LMS, because people would ask me about, for example, this course, and they wanted to use components of it. So I thought, in order to get it to the general public, to educators and others, I know I'll use the experience builder and I'll create story maps that are inside of it. So that's another way of sharing a collection of things. Okay. All right. Keep learning. How do I keep learning about this? There is a Getting Started with Story Maps tutorial, as you probably would expect. Here's a link to the hands-on lesson that we didn't finish, but you started at least along the path of, and hopefully there's no angst that we didn't finish, but you can see that probably would have taken about 2.5 hours to actually go through everyone. But you did great because you started on the path. The lesson on actually connecting the story maps, surveys, dashboards, and maps that I just referred to with my walkability example, you come up with your own example that's much more interesting than mine. I'm sure I look forward to seeing those in the future. But there's a lesson on doing that. The good folks at the University of Minnesota have created a Teach with Story Maps portal, and they've got some examples of rubrics that you could use as an instructor when you're using story maps. One note, though, instructionally, I actually don't start with story maps in either geography or enviro or even GIS courses. And the reason why is because even though they're really compelling, well, first of all, I could teach content with the cyclone story map or the climate change story map or the, et cetera. I could teach content with those, but actually creating the story maps, that's really never my first activity. And the reason why is because, as you saw in this workshop, there are other components that you actually need to feed into your story maps. And so really starting with something like ArcGIS Online, how do I create a map? How do I add layers? How do I symbolize them? How do I classify the categories of data in there, et cetera, projections, all that kind of thing. That's actually really is needed first before you make a story map, because as you know, unless your story map is just text and videos, you really need to have some maps in there. And in order to make the maps in there, that's kind of like step one. This is kind of like the next thing after getting some of those foundations down, in my view. So that's usually why I don't start with this to actually create, but certainly there's a lot of good content out there. But be critical of the data, and I'll just close with this as we're out of time. But the Spatial Reserves data blog is all about some of the things that you folks were touching on earlier. How do I find data? How do I know if it's any good? And societal issues like copyright, crowdsourcing, VGI, citizen science, et cetera. Okay, location privacy, things like that. So I'm hoping that Spatial Reserves data blog is helpful as you think about other considerations, and especially how to find data and how do I know if I can trust it. In ArcGIS Online, for example, I've got millions, literally, layers at my fingertips. Questions, comments? Sorry that we're just right on the 2-hour mark, but thanks for hanging in there, folks. And I wish you all success. But I'm willing to hang on here if you would like to chat some more.
Thank you so much, Joseph. That was really amazing. I think there was only one unanswered question in the chat, which was, is it possible to get a link to the workshop you taught recently on Living Atlas?
Oh, you're so nice. Becky, these are the greatest people ever. Yes. Yes. How would I do that most efficiently?
If you want to email it to me, I can include it when I send it out to people, maybe.
Yep. Here is let me make sure that it was Friday, and I'm hoping that they actually put it.
And then we also had a couple questions from people who were really wanting to find your map, but struggling to do that from our interface. So I promised to hang on after the workshop. Just a heads up if anyone wants to stick around.
Yep. Okay, I found the event from last Friday about the Living Atlas, and I'm going to paste it in here. They may not have the recording there yet, but they should in a few days. If not, I can send you all the slides that I used.
Wonderful, thank you. So we do have one question from Lamilla. How can we find examples of data in GIS as a way of understanding the best way to label and develop metadata? The question is because we're doing campus building maps, are others doing them, and how are they organizing their fields?
Awesome. Yeah, we have a small but growing example of, or set of examples of people creating campus maps. Some of them are actually using the community maps program at Esri. So part of that, a subset of the community maps is campus maps. And so if at some point, if you get to the point where you want to submit those and they become baked into the ArcGIS Online topo base for inside ArcGIS Online, we have not a very complicated, a very small set of features that we're seeking for that. It's probably a subset of the things that you're collecting, and you could actually submit those, and then they would become a permanent part of the base map that everybody would see. And you collected that, yes. So there's a sense of pride there. As part of that program, the reason why I'm going down that pathway is that we have some procedures for how to correctly tag the buildings and sidewalks and ADA entrances and all the rest of it that you might be interested in collecting. So I guess just jot me a note and I can assemble that small set of resources for you. There's also a very nice lesson on populating metadata as part of the learn.arcgisonline or .com gallery. It's about creating metadata. My colleague Colin Childs created that one. If I can find it in a minute, I will. But otherwise, just go to learn.arcgis.com. Good questions, though. You folks are great.
Because we are part of the community map, but I'm trying to add content actually around our building's history, and it's getting complicated.
There's another, history of building X as we go back in time. One of my colleagues, Charlie Fry, who is a cartographer here, he is one of those wonderful people that, oh, by the way, on the side, I've got this incredible historical map of Boston, for example, and other places. So I can direct you to some of his resources as well. But here's that lesson that I just pasted in there.
I would really love that because I'm using some of the Boston data.
Cool. Okay, Ludmilla.
Massachusetts after all, so yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, jot me a note, right? You know how to get a hold of me, and I can send you the whole scoop.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for doing what you're doing. And all of you, keep up the good work, map on, and we will keep in touch. I'm going to put my contact information up here one last time.
We had one more question for you, and that's, is it possible to integrate like other quiz platforms like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics?
You can integrate them, yes. I have a whole essay on creating quizzes in with GIS. Let me pull that up. I'll paste this in here as well because I'm right with you. I think it's an underutilized set of capabilities. So using GIS to create and give quizzes in various. We've got examples, and it's not the end all be all, but I'm hoping it's useful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think I interrupted you from pasting the link to to that story map with your contact info.
Oh, right.
Are there any other questions for Joseph before I stop the recording? Okay, well, I will just say one more time. Thank you so much, Dr. Kursky. This was really awesome.
Well, it's a huge honor working with your good community here, Becky. Keep up the good work there. And folks, map on. Keep up the good work. And we will see you online somewhere. Hopefully someday face to face.